Police officer has a strange feeling about a little girl on the bus. But when she says 3 words, everything changes. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Tim Watson had learned to trust his instincts. 15 years in law enforcement had taught him that sometimes the smallest things, the flicker of an eye, the stiffening of a shoulder, the way someone hesitated before answering a simple question, could mean the difference between saving a life and missing a crucial clue. And today, that feeling struck him harder than it had in years. It started the moment a man boarded his bus at the downtown stop, tugging a little girl along behind him. She was small, no older than 6, and barely visible beneath the oversized hoodie she wore. The fabric swallowed her tiny frame, the sleeves covering her hands entirely, as if she were trying to disappear inside it. Her hair was a tangled mess, blonde but dull, lacking the shine of a well-cared-for child. She moved slowly, hesitantly, as though afraid to lift her feet too high off the ground. The man holding her wrist, because it wasn't a fatherly grip, not the gentle way a parent would hold their child's hand, was jittery. His eyes darted around the bus before he quickly pulled his hood up. Even though the California heat made the air thick and heavy, he had a thin, wiry frame and an angular face with stubble darkening his jawline. His free hand clenched and unclenched at his side, his knee bouncing in agitation as he guided the girl toward the very back of the bus. Tim, sitting in the driver's seat, barely turned his head, but followed their every movement in the wide rearview mirror. He'd seen this kind of thing before. Parents traveling with children didn't act like this. Fathers didn't pull their daughters through a crowded bus like they were dragging luggage. And little girls didn't shrink into themselves like ghosts. Tim felt the first stirrings of something dark, something deeply unsettling curl in his stomach. He kept his hand steady on the wheel as the bus doors closed behind them. "Next stop, Market Street," he announced, his voice calm and even. The man and the girl didn't respond. As Tim pulled the bus back onto the road, he flicked a quick glance at the mirror again. The man had forced the girl into the last row, positioning himself protectively at the edge of the seat as if shielding her from view. His arm stretched out along the backrest, but it wasn't a casual gesture. It was a barricade. Tim's pulse quickened. The little girl barely moved. She stared down at her lap, her fingers curled into small fists. Then the man leaned toward her. His lips moved, whispering something that Tim couldn't hear. The girl flinched. Not a big movement, just a small, involuntary jerk of her shoulders like she was bracing for something. And that's when Tim knew. This wasn't right. The city hummed outside the windows, the late morning sun casting long shadows across the sidewalks. Traffic was light, and the bus rumbled smoothly down the familiar streets. To everyone else, it was just another normal day. But to Tim, every nerve in his body was screaming. Then his earpiece crackled. Amber Alert issued. 6-year-old girl reported missing. Last seen wearing an oversized green hoodie. Possible abduction. Suspect is an adult male, late 30s, last seen in the downtown area. Tim's blood ran cold. He swallowed, forcing his expression to remain neutral as his grip on the wheel tightened just slightly. Oversized green hoodie, 6 years old, a man in his late 30s. The pieces fell into place in an instant, and Tim's heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. He didn't react outwardly. Didn't slow the bus, didn't turn his head. Any sudden movement, any sign that he'd realized something was wrong. And this man, whoever he was, might panic. He had to be smart. Tim exhaled slowly through his nose. His training kicked in, his mind shifting gears into strategy. He needed to get a better look at the girl without raising suspicion, needed to confirm the details of the alert before making a move. Carefully, he adjusted the mirror just enough to get a better angle. And that's when he noticed it. The girl's stomach. At first glance, she was just a thin child swallowed by a too big hoodie. But now, as she shifted slightly, something about her midsection caught his eye. It was swollen, not the round belly of a healthy child, nor the soft fullness of baby fat. This was different. Her frame was fragile, arms too thin, shoulders narrow, but her stomach, it bulged unnaturally beneath the fabric. Tim's breath hitched. Malnutrition? A medical condition? Or something much worse? His jaw clenched. He'd seen enough cases of abuse, neglect, and trafficking to know that this could mean something far more sinister. He needed to act, but he couldn't just call for help. He had to do it discreetly. If the man realized he was onto him, he could run. He could hurt the girl. Tim glanced at the next intersection. A plan formed in his mind. He reached for the bus's intercom and kept his voice steady. "Folks, we're going to make a quick stop for a routine inspection. Shouldn't take more than a few minutes. Stay seated while I check things out." The announcement was vague enough not to raise alarm, but just unusual enough to buy him time. He saw the man tense. His fingers twitched against the seat, his leg bouncing harder. His eyes flicked to the front of the bus, then back to the doors. Tim knew that look. He was calculating an escape. Tim kept his movements calm, controlled. He needed to keep this man exactly where he was until help arrived. The little girl, still silent, squeezed her hands together so tightly her knuckles turned white. Tim's heart pounded as he pulled the bus toward the curb. Every second mattered now, because he wasn't going to let this girl disappear. Not today. Not on his watch. Tim Watson had faced dangerous situations before. He had chased down criminals in back alleys, stood in tense standoffs with armed suspects, and walked into rooms where he wasn't sure he'd walk out again. But this was different. This wasn't a man with a gun or a thief caught in the act. This was a little girl, and she was terrified. Tim kept his posture relaxed as he pulled the bus toward the curb, slowing it down just enough to make it seem like a routine stop. The moment the brakes hissed, he felt the shift in energy behind him. The man stiffened. He didn't look around, didn't react visibly, but Tim had seen this before. Predators could feel when they were being hunted. Tim turned off the engine. He could feel the weight of time pressing on him. Every second that passed brought him closer to either stopping this man or losing the girl forever. He stood up slowly, keeping his hands visible, moving like this was just another part of his daily route. "All right, folks," he said, voice casual, projecting confidence. "There's been a report of an unattended bag left on board earlier this morning. Just need to check around for safety reasons. Nothing to worry about. Should only take a minute." The man didn't move. He kept his head down, staring at the floor, but his leg bounced rapidly, the nervous twitch growing worse. Tim knew what he was thinking. Do I run? Do I wait? Is this a setup? The rest of the passengers, mildly annoyed but compliant, began shifting in their seats, checking under their feet. Tim walked the aisle slowly, pausing at each row, pretending to look under seats. But his real focus was on the last row, on the man, on the little girl who hadn't moved a muscle since she'd boarded. He reached the second-to-last row and knelt down, feigning interest under a nearby seat. And then he heard it. A whisper. It was so soft that he almost didn't catch it, but it was there. "Help me!" Tim's blood ran cold. The little girl hadn't spoken a single word since she stepped onto the bus. Not when the man whispered to her. Not when the other passengers rustled in their seats. But now, with her voice barely above a breath, she had spoken, and it was the confirmation he needed. Tim didn't react immediately. If he snapped his head toward her, if he made it obvious that he'd heard her, the man would know. And if he panicked, this could turn ugly. Fast. So instead, Tim nodded slightly. Just a small, almost imperceptible movement. And then, very deliberately, he turned his attention to the man. "Sir," he said, keeping his voice calm but firm. "Would you mind standing up for just a second? Need to check under your seat." The man finally looked up. His face was gaunt, pale. Beads of sweat lined his forehead despite the cool air circulating through the bus. His eyes, small, restless, locked onto Tim's for just a second too long. It was a mistake. Because now Tim knew. Guilt, panic, fear, they were written all over his face. I didn't see anything left back here," the man said, his voice hoarse, rough around the edges. "Still gotta check," Tim replied, offering a polite smile. "Standard procedure." The man hesitated, and then, slowly, he stood. The girl flinched when he moved, as if bracing for something. Tim saw it, and that was all he needed. Beneath the hoodie, her hands were trembling. She wasn't just scared. She was trapped. Tim didn't let his gaze linger too long. Instead, he bent down and pretended to scan under the seat. He moved slowly, buying time. His heart pounded as he reached toward his waist, where his police radio was clipped beneath his uniform. His fingers brushed against the concealed button. One tap, a silent distress signal. The police dispatch on the other end would receive it instantly. No words needed. They would know that an undercover officer was in distress and needed backup. The plan was set. Now he just had to keep them both on the bus until help arrived. Tim straightened and dusted off his pants, offering another easygoing smile. All clear back here. Thanks for cooperating. He turned casually and began walking back toward the driver's seat, but he barely made it 3 steps before the man spoke again. We need to get off. Tim stopped, turned back. The man was gripping the little girl's wrist now, his fingers wrapped too tightly around her fragile arm. Tim's jaw tightened. Sorry, sir, he said, keeping his voice light. Gotta keep everyone on board until I get the all clear from my supervisor. The man's grip tightened. The girl's body tensed. I don't give a damn about your supervisor, the man hissed, his eyes wild now. Let us off. Now! The tension in the bus shifted instantly. The other passengers, previously indifferent, sensed the change. Some turned their heads, others stiffened in their seats. Tim forced himself to stay calm. If he reacted too soon, if he made a move before his backup arrived, this could turn dangerous. His only option was to stall. I understand, he said, taking a step closer. But there's a process we gotta follow, sir. It's for everyone's safety. Safety, the man spat. Bullshit. He yanked the little girl forward, and she stumbled, barely catching herself. Tim saw the flicker of pain in her face, the way she clenched her jaw. He was hurting her. Tim clenched his fists. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to act now, but he couldn't. Not yet. He glanced at the clock above the windshield. 3 more minutes. That's how long it would take for his team to arrive. 3 minutes. But looking at the man's eyes, wild, desperate, calculating, Tim knew he might not have that long. And then the man did something that made Tim's stomach drop. He reached into his pocket. Tim's breath hitched. Was it a weapon? A phone to call someone? Something worse? Tim's body went rigid, his mind racing through every possible scenario. 3 minutes. He just had to hold out for 3 more minutes. But looking at the man's shaking hands, his erratic breathing, the crazed glint in his eye, Tim had the sickening feeling that he was about to run out of time. Tim Watson had been in countless dangerous situations before, but this one was different. This wasn't a gunfight in an alleyway or a high-speed chase through the streets of San Jose. This was a fragile little girl, her wrist clamped in the grip of a man who was growing more unpredictable by the second. And now, that man was reaching into his pocket. Tim's heartbeat slammed against his ribs. He knew better than to react too fast. If the man pulled out a weapon, Tim had to be ready, but he also couldn't make a move too soon. The wrong reaction could push him over the edge. In his peripheral vision, Tim saw the other passengers stiffen. Some of them looked confused. Others sensed that something was very, very wrong. The little girl didn't move, didn't blink. She was frozen, trapped in the silent terror of a child who had learned that even the smallest motion could have consequences. Then, in one sharp movement, the man yanked something from his pocket. Tim's muscles coiled, ready to strike. But it wasn't a gun. It was a switchblade, a small rusted thing with a serrated edge that had seen too many years of use. The kind of blade someone might use to gut a fish, or worse. Tim's stomach clenched. The man flicked it open with a click that echoed through the tense silence of the bus. I said, he growled, his voice shaking with raw nerves. Let us off, now. Tim didn't move, didn't breathe. Time had slowed. He could hear every sound, the hum of the bus engine, the sharp inhale of a woman in the front row, the creak of the seat as the little girl's body trembled. He had 2 minutes before backup arrived. But 2 minutes was a lifetime when a knife was involved. Listen, Tim said, keeping his voice even. I don't want any trouble. Then open the damn doors. The man's grip on the knife tightened. His fingers were twitchy, his stance unstable. Tim could see it now, the man wasn't a trained criminal. He wasn't someone used to violence. He was desperate, and desperate men were the most dangerous kind. Tim took a slow step forward, careful not to make any sudden movements. Okay, he said. You want off the bus? We can figure that out. The man's eyes darted toward the doors, calculating. He was looking for an escape route. Tim saw his opening. If I open the doors, you have to let go of the girl, he said. That's the deal. The man's jaw tightened. A flicker of hesitation crossed his face. Tim pressed forward. You don't want to hurt her. I can see that. So let's do this the easy way. The man hesitated just a second too long. And in that second, Tim moved. With the reflexes honed from years in the force, he lunged forward and grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it sharply. The knife clattered to the floor, and the little girl let out a sharp, startled gasp. The man snarled, trying to yank free, but Tim had already locked his arm in place. "Let her go," Tim barked. The man's fingers stayed clenched around the girl's wrist. Then, a loud bang outside, a police siren. The distraction was all Tim needed. With a sharp twist, he pulled the man forward, slamming him face first against the nearest pole. The man let out a pained grunt, his grip finally loosening on the girl. "Run!" Tim shouted. The little girl hesitated for half a second before bolting down the aisle, her tiny legs moving faster than he thought possible. She was free. The bus doors burst open. A flood of uniformed officers stormed inside, weapons drawn. Tim stepped back just as the man slumped to the ground, dazed, a thin trail of blood trickling from his nose. It was over, or so he thought, because then, in the chaos, he saw something. As the little girl stumbled toward an officer, clutching her oversized hoodie, the fabric shifted, just enough for Tim to get a glimpse of her stomach, and what he saw made his blood turn to ice. It wasn't just an unusual swelling. It was something much, much worse. Tim Watson had seen horrors in his time. Crime scenes that left permanent scars in his mind. Victims whose faces haunted his dreams. But nothing, not a single case, not a single moment in his 15 years on the force, had prepared him for what he saw when the little girl's hoodie shifted. Her stomach wasn't just swollen. It was distorted, bulging unevenly beneath the oversized fabric, her frail frame stretched in a way that didn't make sense. It wasn't just malnutrition. It wasn't just neglect. It was something else. Something unnatural. Tim felt his heart seize in his chest. "Wait!" He stepped forward. But the officers were already moving, guiding the girl toward the waiting ambulance outside. She let them lead her, not resisting, her head still down, her arms wrapped protectively around herself. She was hiding something. Tim turned to the man now being forced to the ground, his face pressed against the dirty bus floor, his hands wrenched behind his back in cuffs. "Who is she?" Tim demanded, his voice sharp, urgent. The man didn't answer. An officer grabbed him by the back of his hoodie and yanked him up. "You better start talking." Still, the man remained silent. Tim clenched his fists. His instincts screamed at him. This wasn't just an abduction. This was something bigger, something worse. He turned back toward the girl. "Stop," he called, pushing past officers. "Before she goes anywhere, we need to check her." The paramedics had already opened the ambulance doors. The girl stood still, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "She might need medical attention," one of them said, reaching for her. The moment they did, the girl panicked. She jerked back so violently she almost fell, her arms locking tighter around her stomach. "Easy, sweetheart," a female paramedic said softly. "You're safe now." The girl shook her head. Tears welled in her wide, exhausted eyes. And then, in the smallest, most fragile voice, "Don't take it." The paramedics froze. Tim's blood ran cold. She wasn't talking about herself. She was talking about whatever was inside of her. Tim took a slow step forward. His voice dropped to a whisper, gentle but firm. "Sweetheart, what's in there?" The girl's lip quivered, but she didn't answer. Instead, she lifted the hem of her hoodie, and the world stopped. Tim felt like the air had been sucked from his lungs. Underneath the hoodie, beneath her fragile ribcage, was a series of thick, jagged stitches running along her abdomen. The skin was bruised and inflamed around them. The wound was fresh, too fresh. This child, this 6-year-old girl, had been cut open, and something had been put inside her. A sickening wave of realization crashed over Tim. This wasn't just a kidnapping. This was trafficking, but not the kind most people thought of. This wasn't about her. It was about what she was carrying. Tim's breath came in sharp, controlled bursts. "We need to get her to the hospital, now!" The paramedics were already moving, gently ushering the girl into the ambulance. Tim climbed in after them. "Go!" he barked. The doors slammed shut. The sirens screamed to life. And as they sped toward the hospital, one thought repeated over and over in Tim's mind. Who did this to her? And what the hell had they put inside her? The ambulance sped through the city, sirens wailing, the bright lights reflecting off the glass buildings as they cut through traffic. Tim sat on the bench beside the stretcher, his hands gripping the metal railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. Across from him, the little girl lay motionless, Her oversized hoodie now pulled up just enough to reveal the jagged, inflamed stitches crisscrossing her small belly. He couldn't look away. It was one of the worst things he had ever seen. The thick black thread, the angry red skin surrounding the wound. Whoever had done this to her hadn't cared about pain, about healing, about anything other than whatever they put inside her. The paramedic, a woman named Jenna Collins, was already working, gloves snapping into place as she leaned in. "Sweetheart, can you tell me your name?" she asked softly, careful not to startle the girl. Silence. Tim watched as Jenna's fingers ghosted near the wound. Careful, precise. The girl flinched violently, curling her body away from the touch. "No," she whimpered, her small voice barely audible over the rumble of the ambulance. Hey, Jenna soothed. "I'm not gonna hurt you, I promise. But I need to check, okay?" The girl shook her head, her breath coming in quick. Sharp gasps. "No, no, no, no." Tim leaned forward, his voice was calm, steady. "Sweetheart, listen to me, we have to help you. But we need to know. Did someone hurt you? Did someone tell you not to talk?" The girl hesitated. Then, in a barely there whisper, "He said it will break." Jenna froze. Tim felt ice crawl down his spine. "Break?" he repeated. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" The girl's small fingers twitched against the fabric of the stretcher. Her eyes darted toward Jenna, then back to Tim, as if she were struggling to find the right words. Then, finally, she whispered, "Inside me." Tim's stomach churned. His mind was already working through the possibilities. Drugs, contraband. Human trafficking rings had been known to use children to smuggle things across borders, sometimes with fake casts, sometimes sewn into dolls, and sometimes inside their bodies. But this girl wasn't some stranger at an airport. She had been kidnapped, and that meant whatever was inside her wasn't meant to be transported somewhere. It was meant to stay. Jenna shot him a look, one that confirmed she was thinking the same thing. "Tim, if she has something implanted inside her, we need an emergency scan the moment we get to the hospital." Tim nodded, his jaw tight. "How long?" 3 minutes. Too long. Tim turned back to the girl. Her tiny hands were clenched into fists, her breathing shallow. She was in pain. She had been suffering for God knows how long, carrying something inside her that she knew wasn't supposed to be there. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "I know you're scared, but I need you to tell me who did this to you." The girl's lips trembled. Then, barely audible, "My daddy." Tim's breath hitched. His grip on the railing tightened. The man from the bus. The one who had refused to let her go. The one who had pulled a knife when he thought he was losing control. She had called him daddy, not just in that moment but before. The way she flinched when he spoke. The way she didn't resist when he grabbed her wrist. The way she never once called for help. Because she had been conditioned not to. Because she had been raised by her own captor. The ambulance screeched into the emergency bay, the back doors bursting open as the hospital trauma team rushed forward. Jenna jumped out first, guiding them toward the girl. "Abdominal trauma, recent surgical intervention. We don't know what's inside. Could be foreign objects. Could be internal injuries. She's in distress." Tim jumped down after her, never taking his eyes off the child as they wheeled her into the brightly lit ER. She was gripping the stretcher rails now, her tiny knuckles white. "Please," she whispered. Tim walked alongside her, keeping his pace even. "We're going to help you. You're safe now." The girl didn't respond. She just stared ahead, her body rigid, as they wheeled her through the double doors and into the unknown. Tim stopped just outside, watching as the doors swung shut. He felt sick, the kind of sick that settled deep in his bones, the kind that didn't go away. A voice broke through the haze. "Officer Watson?" Tim turned. Dr. Eric Patel, head of the ER, was standing beside him, flipping through a patient chart. His expression was grim. "I need you to tell me everything you know. Now." Tim exhaled sharply. She was taken by a man claiming to be her father. He resisted. "We don't have proof of his identity yet, but he's not her father." Tim stiffened. Dr. Patel's gaze darkened. "We ran a quick scan before taking her into surgery. Whatever is inside her, it's deliberate. And it was put there recently, less than 48 hours ago." Tim's stomach twisted. "Drugs?" he asked. Dr. Patel shook his head. "No, and that's the part that concerns me." Tim clenched his jaw. "Then what is it?" Dr. Patel's eyes met his, and in a voice that made the air feel too still, he said, something mechanical. The world seemed to tilt. Tim felt the words settle into his bones, into the space between his ribs where dread took hold and refused to let go. Mechanical, he repeated. Dr. Patel nodded. It's not organic. Whatever they put inside her, it's not natural. Tim turned toward the ER doors, his heart pounding harder than it had in years, because suddenly this wasn't just an abduction. It wasn't just trafficking. It wasn't just smuggling. It was something else, something worse. And whoever had done this wasn't just trying to hide something inside her. They were waiting for it to be found. Tim Watson had thought he had seen the worst of it. The stitches, the terror in the little girl's eyes, the confession that her own daddy had done this to her. But this was something else entirely. Something mechanical. The words clanged in his skull like a warning bell. Tim turned sharply toward Dr. Patel, his pulse hammering. What the hell do you mean, mechanical? Dr. Patel inhaled deeply, flipping through the scan results in his hands. The X-ray showed something embedded deep in her abdominal cavity. It's not organic, and it's not narcotics. We're looking at something metallic, small, circular, possibly electronic. Tim felt his breath tighten. Metal, electronics, inside a 6-year-old girl. He had dealt with child trafficking, smuggling, and abuse cases before. He had seen the way these monsters treated children as objects, as means to an end. But he had never come across something like this. You're telling me they implanted a device in her? He asked, his voice low, controlled. Dr. Patel nodded grimly. We need to operate immediately, but we have no idea what we're dealing with. If we don't remove it soon, it could cause internal damage, or worse. Tim didn't say it, but he knew Patel was thinking the same thing. They had no idea what was inside her, and they had no idea why it was there. Tim ran a hand down his face, trying to push back the anger swelling inside him. He turned toward the ER doors, peering through the narrow window. Inside, the little girl lay motionless on the hospital bed, her tiny body swallowed by the crisp white sheets. A team of doctors and nurses worked around her, moving with quiet urgency. She looked smaller than ever, vulnerable, alone. Tim had to do something. He spun back to Dr. Patel. Go ahead with the surgery, but I need to get answers now. Dr. Patel gave him a solemn nod. I'll keep you updated. Tim didn't waste another second. He stormed down the hall through the automatic doors and into the waiting area where 2 uniformed officers stood guard. Between them, handcuffed to a metal chair, was the man from the bus. His head was down, his shoulders hunched. His face was smeared with dried blood from where Tim had slammed him against the pole. Tim stopped in front of him. The man didn't look up. Tim's jaw clenched. His fingers itched to grab him, shake him, demand answers. But he forced himself to stay calm. She called you daddy, Tim said evenly. But we both know that's a damn lie. So tell me, who are you? Silence. Tim took a step closer. What did you do to that little girl? The man exhaled slowly, tilting his head up just enough for Tim to see the cold glint in his eyes. He smirked, and that smirk sent a chill down Tim's spine. It wasn't fear. It wasn't regret. It was satisfaction, like he had already won. Tim's fists curled. Talk, now! The man leaned back against the chair, his cuffs rattling. You're too late. Tim's breath stalled. The room felt colder. He took another step forward, his voice like steel. Too late for what? The man just smiled, and alarm bells exploded in Tim's mind. He spun toward the officers. Get the bomb squad here, now! One of them flinched. Bomb squad? Tim turned back to the man, his pulse a roaring thunder in his ears. Tell me what's inside her. The man gave a lazy shrug. Wouldn't you like to know? Tim saw red. He lunged forward, grabbing the man by the collar and yanking him up so fast that the chair screeched against the tile floor. Tell me. The smirk never faded. Enjoy the show. Tim let go, shoving him back down. He turned to the officers. Get this bastard out of here. Maximum security. No visitors, no phone calls, and someone get me a goddamn trace on his identity. They scrambled into action. Tim was already moving, sprinting back toward the ER. Too late. What the hell did that mean? He burst through the doors just as Dr. Patel was coming out. The look on his face made Tim's stomach plummet. Watson, we have a problem, Patel said, his voice tight. Tim's throat was dry. Tell me. Patel exhaled sharply. We were prepping her for surgery, but when we hooked her up to the heart monitor, Something activated. A slow, cold dread crept into Tim's bones. Activated? He repeated. Patel nodded. Something inside her started transmitting. The world tilted. Tim grabbed Patel's arm. You're telling me she's got a live device inside her? Patel's face was grim. We think it's some kind of signal, maybe a trigger. Tim didn't hesitate. He turned and barked to the nearest nurse. Get the hospital on lockdown, now. She froze, wide-eyed. Lockdown? Now! She scrambled to the phone. Tim turned back to Patel. You can't operate yet, not until we know exactly what we're dealing with. Patel's jaw tightened. She doesn't have much time. If we wait too long, we don't have a choice, Tim cut in. If that thing is transmitting a signal, someone is on the other end. And whoever it was, they were waiting. Patel hesitated, then gave a short nod. I'll keep her stable, but you need to hurry. Tim didn't waste another second. He bolted out of the ER, phone already in hand. He dialed a number he hadn't called in years, one that he had sworn he would never need again. After 2 rings, a voice answered. FBI Special Agent Rachel Monroe. Rachel, Tim said, his voice urgent. I need you in San Jose right now. A brief pause. What's going on? Tim inhaled sharply. A 6-year-old girl just came into my custody. She was kidnapped, stitched up like a goddamn science experiment, and there's something mechanical inside her that just started transmitting. Silence. Then, I'm on my way. Tim hung up, his hands were shaking. Because now, he knew. This wasn't just a kidnapping, this wasn't just a trafficking case. This was something bigger, and whoever was behind it was still watching. Tim Watson had spent years unraveling the darkest corners of the world. But this was something else entirely. The hospital was now in full lockdown. Security guards blocked every exit. Nurses whispered in hushed voices, their eyes darting toward the ER where the little girl lay, hooked up to monitors, her small chest rising and falling beneath the bright white sheets. And somewhere inside her, a device was sending a signal. To who? And for what? Tim didn't have time to figure it out on his own. That's why he had called Rachel Monroe. The FBI agent was the best at what she did, tracking the kind of criminals that didn't just take kids for money, but for something much worse. Tim paced the hospital corridor, his phone clutched in his hand, watching the double doors at the end of the hall. Any minute now. He needed answers, he needed them fast. The man from the bus, whoever the hell he was, had smirked when Tim asked what was inside the girl. He had said, "You're too late." Too late for what? The elevator at the end of the hall dinged, and then the doors slid open. Rachel Monroe stepped out. She hadn't changed. The same sharp, no-nonsense gaze, the dark blazer over a fitted shirt, the government-issued heels that somehow never slowed her down. The moment she saw Tim, she walked straight toward him. "Watson," she said briskly. "Talk." Tim exhaled, rubbing his jaw. 6-year-old girl, found her on a bus with a guy claiming to be her father. He wasn't. She's been stitched up. Something was put inside her, and now it's transmitting a signal. Rachel's brows furrowed. Human trafficking? Maybe, but it doesn't feel right. It's organized, Rachel. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. She nodded once. Where's the girl? ER. They can't operate until we know what's inside her. Rachel's expression hardened. Then let's find out. They strode toward the ER, past nervous nurses and tight-lipped doctors. When they stepped inside, Dr. Patel was waiting for them, arms crossed, his face a mask of worry. You the feds? He asked, eyeing Rachel. Special Agent Monroe, she confirmed. What do we know? Patel sighed. We did a full body scan. The object is lodged near her liver, about 2 inches in diameter. We don't know exactly what it is yet, but it's definitely electronic. And it's active. Rachel's jaw tightened. Could it be a bomb? Tim felt his stomach clench. Patel hesitated. Doubtful. No explosive signatures. But if it's transmitting, there's a reason. Rachel turned to Tim. What did the guy from the bus say? Tim exhaled. Nothing useful. Just smirked and said we were too late. Rachel's face darkened. Then we need to assume the worst. She turned back to Patel. You need to get that thing out of her. Now. Patel hesitated. I need clearance for an emergency surgery under these conditions. Rachel pulled out her badge. You have it. Get a bomb squad in here if you have to. But that device does not stay inside her. Patel nodded and disappeared into the surgical wing. Tim turned to Rachel. If that thing is transmitting, someone is watching. Someone is waiting for something. Rachel pulled out her phone, dialing a number. If this is part of a larger operation, we need cyber tracking on that signal. Tim watched her, his nerves electric. Everything was moving too fast, and yet not fast enough. Then, a beep from the heart monitor. They both turned toward the little girl. Her tiny body shifted under the sheets. Her eyelashes fluttered. Then, her eyes opened. Tim moved closer. "Hey, sweetheart." She blinked up at him. Rachel softened her tone. "Can you tell us your name?" The girl swallowed, her lips dry, and then in a voice barely above a whisper, "Annie." Tim's chest tightened. "Annie," he repeated softly. "That's a beautiful name." Rachel crouched beside the bed, her expression gentle but focused. "Annie, sweetheart, do you know what's inside you?" Annie hesitated. Then, "He told me. It's a clock." Tim and Rachel exchanged a look. "A clock?" Rachel's voice was careful. "Who told you that, Annie?" Annie's breath hitched. "My daddy." Tim's pulse hammered. "The man on the bus?" Annie shook her head. "No, not him." Rachel's voice remained steady. "Annie, sweetheart, who is your real daddy?" The little girl hesitated. Then, in a voice so small it nearly shattered them, "I don't know." Rachel and Tim locked eyes, and in that moment, they both knew. This wasn't just an abduction, this wasn't just a trafficking case. Annie had been born into this, and whoever had done this to her wasn't done yet. Rachel Monroe was one of the best FBI agents in the country. She had hunted down the worst of the worst: serial killers, traffickers, cyber criminals, people who thrived in the shadows of society. But never had she come across something like this. A 6-year-old girl with a mechanical device inside her body, a signal that had activated the moment they put her on life support. And now, a horrifying revelation. She didn't know who her father was. Rachel looked at Tim. His face was carved from stone, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. She knew that look. Rage. Not the kind that made a man reckless, the kind that made a man dangerous. Tim turned back to Annie, his voice calm despite the fury simmering beneath it. "Sweetheart, it's okay. You're safe now. No one is going to hurt you." Annie blinked up at him, her fingers gripping the thin hospital blanket. "I don't want the clock to break," she whispered. Rachel's blood ran cold. "Annie," she said carefully, "did someone tell you what happens if the clock breaks?" Annie hesitated. Then, "It makes the bad men come." A chill crawled up Rachel's spine. Tim exhaled, running a hand over his face. "This just keeps getting worse." Rachel straightened, pulling out her phone. "I need my cyber unit tracking that signal now." Tim turned to her. "Whoever put that thing inside her, they're watching, aren't they?" Rachel met his eyes, and for the first time since she had arrived, she looked truly uneasy. "Not just watching," she said. "They're waiting for something." The signal changes. The hospital was a fortress now. Lockdown was in place. Police officers stood at every entrance, their radios buzzing with updates. But Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. Because whoever was behind this, they weren't ordinary criminals. They had surgically implanted a device into a child. They had activated it remotely. And now, according to Annie, if it broke, the bad men would come. Rachel stared at the little girl through the hospital room window. What kind of monsters did this to a child? Her phone buzzed. She answered instantly. "Monroe." A voice crackled on the other end. "Agent Monroe, this is Special Agent Cameron. We tracked the signal." Rachel's pulse quickened. "Where is it leading?" Silence, then. "That's the thing, it's not going anywhere." Rachel's breath stalled. "What do you mean?" Cameron hesitated. "It's not transmitting coordinates. It's not a tracker. It's something else." Rachel felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. "Then what the hell is it?" "It's a receiver." Rachel froze. "Explain," she demanded. Cameron's voice was grim. "It's not sending information, it's waiting to receive something, and whatever it's waiting for, it's getting closer." Rachel's fingers tightened around the phone. "Closer," she repeated. Cameron exhaled. "The signal is growing stronger. Something or someone is moving toward her." Rachel's blood turned to ice. She snapped her head toward Tim. "We have a problem." Tim was already moving. "Tell me." Rachel lowered the phone. "The signal isn't sending data, it's receiving." Tim's eyes darkened. "Receiving what?" Rachel's stomach twisted. "I don't know," she admitted. Tim looked back at Annie, his jaw clenched. Then we better find out before it gets here. Because if that signal was waiting for something, it meant the real danger hadn't even begun yet. Tim Watson had spent his entire career running toward danger. He had taken down armed criminals, chased fugitives through alleyways, and walked into dark rooms without knowing if he'd walk back out. But this was something else. A 6-year-old girl with a device buried inside her, a signal that wasn't broadcasting out, but instead waiting for something. And now, the most terrifying part of all. Whatever it was waiting for, it was getting closer. His grip on his phone tightened. "How much time do we have?" he asked Rachel, his voice low. Rachel's expression was grim. "We don't know. The signal strength is increasing, which means whatever it's connected to is moving toward us." His gut twisted. "You're telling me someone out there is tracking her in real time?" Rachel nodded. "And we don't know what happens when they get here." Tim exhaled sharply. They were running out of time. Outside the hospital, the city moved as if nothing was wrong. Cars zipped down the streets. Pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks. People went about their lives completely unaware that something was coming. Inside, however, the tension was suffocating. Tim stood by the window of Annie's hospital room, watching as armed officers took position in the hallways. Every entrance was locked down, security had been tripled, but it still didn't feel like enough. Rachel stepped up beside him. "We need to assume the worst." His jaw clenched. "What do you think is coming for her?" Rachel hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know, but I have a feeling we won't have to wait long to find out." A soft rustling sound made them both turn. Annie had shifted in the bed, her small fingers gripping the blankets tightly. She was awake again, her eyes wide with fear. Tim moved toward her, keeping his voice gentle. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" Annie swallowed hard. Then, her voice small, fragile, "They're here." His pulse slammed against his ribs. Rachel's face paled. "Annie, sweetheart, who's here?" Annie's lips trembled. Then she lifted her small hand and pointed toward the window. Tim and Rachel turned at the same time. What they saw made the air turn to ice. 2 black SUVs had just pulled up across the street. The doors opened, and men in dark suits stepped out, one by one. Their movements were precise, controlled, not like common criminals, not like traffickers, like something worse, something organized. And then, one of them looked up, right at Tim, and smiled. Tim Watson had been in enough life-threatening situations to recognize one when he saw it. The men stepping out of those SUVs weren't just criminals. They weren't thugs looking for a quick grab and go. They were something else, too controlled, too coordinated, too confident. One of them, a tall man with a shaved head and a crisp black suit, adjusted his tie. Then, as if he knew exactly who was watching him, he looked up and smiled. A slow, deliberate smile. Tim's stomach twisted. Rachel saw it too. Her entire body went rigid, her jaw tightening. "That's not a trafficker," she murmured. "That's someone with authority." Tim knew she was right. The way the man held himself, the way the others flanked him in formation, like a unit. This wasn't a gang. This was an operation. And whatever they wanted, it had everything to do with Annie. Rachel grabbed her phone, already dialing. "I'm getting a full federal response here. This just became a national security issue." Tim's pulse pounded as he turned back to Annie. She was still gripping the blanket tightly, her small knuckles white. He crouched beside her bed, keeping his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Annie, sweetheart, do you know those men?" She hesitated. Then, in a barely there whisper, "I think so." A cold chill wrapped around Tim's spine. "How do you know them, honey?" Annie's lip quivered. "They used to come see my daddy." Rachel stopped mid-sentence on the phone. Her gaze snapped to Tim, then back to Annie. "The man from the bus? Or someone else?" Annie shook her head quickly. "Not him. My real daddy." Tim exhaled slowly, his mind racing. "Annie, sweetheart, do you remember your real daddy's name?" Her small shoulders tensed. Her fingers clutched at her stomach as if she could protect the thing inside her. And then, in a trembling voice, "I wasn't supposed to know it, but I heard them say it one time." Tim leaned in. "Can you tell us?" Annie swallowed hard. "His name was Dr. Keaton." Rachel's face darkened instantly. Tim recognized that look. She knew something. "Rachel," he pressed. "Who the hell is Dr. Keaton?" Rachel was already back on her phone, her fingers flying as she typed. Her voice was tight, urgent. We need full clearance on the name Dr. Keaton immediately. Any known associates, current or past employment, criminal records. Government ties? Tim's blood ran cold. Government ties. He turned back toward the window where the suited men were now crossing the street toward the hospital. They weren't hiding. They weren't sneaking in. They were walking in like they belonged here. Rachel's phone buzzed with a return call. She answered instantly. Tell me you have something. A beat of silence, then. Rachel, the voice on the other end said. Whatever you just stepped into, you need to back out. Now. Rachel's breath stalled. What? You heard me. This isn't your case anymore. Rachel's eyes flashed with fury. The hell it isn't. I have a 6-year-old girl with a surgically implanted device inside her that's actively transmitting a signal. I need answers. The voice on the line hesitated. Then, Dr. Keaton was a government scientist. His research was classified. If his daughter has a device inside her, you're dealing with something way bigger than you realize. Tim felt his stomach drop. Rachel's grip on the phone tightened. Who are the men outside? A pause. Then, I can't tell you that. Rachel clenched her jaw. You mean you won't tell me that? The voice lowered. Rachel, walk away. This is above you. The call went dead. Rachel's face was a mask of fury as she slowly lowered the phone. Tim exhaled sharply. What did they say? Rachel met his eyes. They told us to walk away. Tim let out a bitter laugh. Not happening. The hospital doors slammed open. The men in black suits stepped inside. And just like that, the war for Annie officially began. Tim Watson had spent his life enforcing the law. He had followed protocol, worked within the system, and trusted that, at the end of the day, there was a right side and a wrong side. But as he watched the men in black suits walk into the hospital like they owned the place, he had the sickening realization that the system had just been ripped out of his hands. These weren't just criminals. They weren't just traffickers or hired guns. They were something else, and they were here for Annie. Rachel Monroe stiffened beside him, her fingers twitching toward the gun holstered at her hip. We have a problem, she murmured. Tim's jaw clenched. No kidding. The leader, the bald man who had smiled at them through the window, strode forward with absolute confidence, his hands clasped neatly behind his back. His posture wasn't aggressive. He wasn't brandishing a weapon. Because he didn't need to. He had already won. A hospital security guard stepped forward. Excuse me, gentlemen. This facility is on lockdown. No visitors are allowed. The bald man reached into his jacket and pulled out a government-issued ID. Not just any ID. A Department of Defense badge. Tim's stomach plummeted. Dr. Keaton's daughter is under our jurisdiction, the bald man announced, his voice smooth, authoritative. We're here to take custody of her immediately. Tim saw red. Before Rachel could stop him, he stormed forward. The hell you are, he growled. The bald man turned his attention to him, unfazed. Officer Watson, isn't it? Tim's spine stiffened. The man knew his name. His gaze flicked to Rachel. And Agent Monroe. It's a pleasure. Rachel stepped beside Tim, her expression cold. Wish I could say the same, she said flatly. The man smiled again. We appreciate your work in securing the girl. We'll take it from here. Tim's fists curled. She's not a damn package. You don't just walk in and claim her like a lost piece of luggage. The bald man's eyes gleamed with amusement. Actually, Officer Watson, that's exactly what we do. Tim's blood boiled. Rachel took a slow step forward. Tell me something, she said, her voice dangerously calm. Why does a 6-year-old girl have a government tracker inside her? The bald man tilted his head. That information is classified. Tim let out a humorless laugh. Yeah, that's not gonna work for me. The bald man didn't react. She is a federal asset. She comes with us. Tim stepped between them and the hospital room door. Not happening. The room went silent. The men in black suits tensed. Rachel's hand hovered near her holster. For a long, heavy moment, no one moved. Then the bald man sighed. You're making this difficult. Tim didn't budge. You have no idea. Then, the lights flickered. Tim's breath stalled. The entire hospital flickered, the overhead lights surging, then dimming, then surging again. A warning siren blared over the intercom. Rachel's phone buzzed violently. She yanked it out, her face twisting in confusion. What the hell? Then she froze. Tim, she whispered. The signal. Tim's pulse pounded. She turned the screen toward him. The signal strength had just spiked to 100%. Whatever was coming for Annie, it was here. The hospital plunged into chaos. The warning siren blared through the halls, echoing off sterile walls as the overhead lights continued to flicker erratically. Nurses rushed between stations, their voices urgent as they scrambled to secure patients. Security officers grabbed their radios, demanding answers. But Tim Watson knew no one had them, because whatever was happening wasn't normal. Rachel Monroe stood frozen beside him, staring at her phone screen. The signal, the one inside Annie, had jumped to full capacity. "What the hell does this mean?" Tim barked. Rachel shook her head. "It means something just activated it." Tim turned sharply to the bald man in the black suit. "You knew this was coming." The man didn't deny it. His posture remained composed, but his eyes had shifted, calculating. He reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, but for a small earpiece. "Control, we've hit a breach. Initiate full protocol." A crackled response came through. "Acknowledged. Extraction in progress." Tim's stomach twisted. "Extraction?" The bald man met his gaze. "Your part in this is over, Officer Watson." Tim saw red. The bastard was taking Annie. He lunged, grabbing the man by the collar and slamming him against the nearest wall. "You don't get to decide that." For the first time, the man's calm demeanor faltered. His hands shot up, but Tim had the advantage. Rage, adrenaline, and 15 years of law enforcement training. Rachel's voice snapped through the chaos. "Tim, we need to move." Then, a new sound erupted. Something mechanical. The overhead lights died completely, plunging the hospital into darkness. A second later, red emergency lights flickered on, bathing everything in a dim, pulsing glow. The alarm changed its tone, a deep, distorted hum that vibrated through the floor. And then, the elevator doors at the end of the hall slid open. Tim turned toward them. His blood ran cold. A figure stepped out, tall, dressed in black, moving too smoothly, too precisely. And behind it, more followed. Rachel inhaled sharply. No way. Tim had no idea who or what they were looking at, but he knew one thing. They weren't here to rescue Annie. They were here to take her. The figures moved with a precision that wasn't natural. Tim had spent his life reading people, predicting their next move, spotting nervous twitches, picking up on subtle cues. But these things, whatever they were, didn't move like normal men. They walked in perfect synchronization, their long strides eerily smooth, their heads never turning as they approached. The hospital's emergency lights pulsed red across their all-black clothing, casting long shadows against the sterile walls. Tim felt the weight of his gun at his hip, but for the first time in years, he wasn't sure if a weapon would make a difference. Rachel's voice was low, tight. "Tim." He didn't turn his head, keeping his eyes locked on the figures. "Yeah? Tell me you're seeing what I'm seeing." Tim swallowed hard. "Oh, I'm seeing it." Rachel's fingers hovered near her holster. "They're not blinking." She was right. Their eyes, dark, empty, unfeeling, never wavered, and they were walking directly toward Annie's hospital room. Tim took a slow step forward, placing himself between them and the door. Not one more step. The figures stopped. The hallway fell deathly silent. The alarm continued its low, distorted hum, but no one moved. Then, for the first time, one of them spoke. "We are here for the child." The voice wasn't human. It was flat, almost robotic, lacking any trace of emotion. Tim felt his pulse hammer against his ribs. "Not happening." The figure tilted its head, as if processing his words. Then, it took another step forward. Tim's body reacted before his brain could catch up. His hand shot to his gun, the metal cool against his palm. Last warning. Another step. Tim pulled the trigger. The gunshot roared through the hallway, the bullet slicing through the air and slamming directly into the figure's chest. But it didn't fall. Tim's stomach dropped. The bullet had hit. He knew it had. But the thing in front of him didn't even flinch. It didn't stagger. It didn't react at all. Instead, it kept walking. Rachel fired next. 3 clean shots. Center mass. Nothing. Tim's grip on his gun tightened. "Oh, hell no." Rachel's voice was sharp. "Urgent. We need to get Annie out of here, now." Tim didn't argue. He turned on his heel, shoving the hospital room door open. Annie was still in bed, curled up against the sheets, her wide eyes filled with terror. "Annie, sweetheart, we have to go," Tim said, moving fast. Annie didn't move, she was shaking. Tim crouched, reaching for her. "It's okay, I got you." She let out a small, broken whisper. "They found me." Tim's stomach twisted. "No, honey, we're not letting them take you." Rachel threw the door shut behind them. "We need an exit now." Tim scooped Annie into his arms, her tiny body light as a feather. "Back stairwell. If we move fast, we can—" The hospital shook. Not a small tremor, a deep rattling vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The emergency lights flickered, and then the walls cracked. Rachel grabbed Tim's arm. "Go! Go now!" Tim sprinted, holding Annie close, his heart hammering. And behind him, the figures kept coming. Tim Watson had been through car chases, shootouts, and hostage situations. He had faced criminals so twisted they made his skin crawl. But never this. Annie trembled in his arms as he sprinted down the hospital corridor, Rachel Monroe right behind him, her gun still drawn even though they both knew it was useless. The figures, the ones who didn't bleed, didn't flinch, didn't stop, were coming, and the hospital was falling apart around them. The walls trembled with a deep guttural vibration, cracks spidering outward from the ceiling like something inside the building was trying to break free. The red emergency lights pulsed, casting their shadows in long, warped streaks along the floor. Rachel kept looking over her shoulder. "They're still coming." Tim didn't dare look back. "Just keep running." Annie's fingers clutched at his jacket. "You can't stop them," she whimpered. Tim tightened his grip on her. "Watch me." They rounded a corner and burst through a stairwell door, nearly slamming into two uniformed officers. "What the hell is going on?" one of them demanded, his hand on his holster. Tim didn't slow down. "If you want to live, start running." Before the officers could react, the hallway behind them exploded with movement. The black-suited figures emerged in perfect unison, moving down the hallway like shadows peeling off the walls. The officers reacted instantly, drawing their weapons. "Freeze!" Tim knew what was about to happen. He didn't wait for it. He pushed past them, Rachel hot on his heels, and took the stairs two at a time. Behind them, gunshots rang out, followed by silence. Rachel let out a sharp breath. "They don't die." Tim's jaw clenched. "Then we don't fight. We run." The stairwell spiraled downward, each step shaking beneath their feet as the entire hospital shuddered. Annie buried her face against his chest. "I don't want to go back," she whimpered. Tim didn't slow. "You're not going anywhere, sweetheart. I promise." Rachel's voice was tight. "You better mean that because we're running out of exits." They hit the ground floor and burst through another door, right into the emergency parking lot. Tim skidded to a halt. Rachel cursed under her breath, because waiting for them, lined up like a wall of black steel, were more SUVs. And this time, the doors were already open. Tim's pulse thundered. Rachel reached for her gun again. "We are so screwed." Then, a single figure stepped out of the lead SUV, not one of the silent ones, not like the others. A man, tall, wearing a gray suit, not black, and when he spoke, it was with a voice that sent ice straight into Tim's veins. "Give me the child." Tim tightened his grip on Annie. "Over my dead body." Tim Watson had stared down murderers. He had walked into rooms with armed men ready to kill him. He had seen darkness in the world that most people never even imagined. But nothing felt as wrong as the man standing in front of him now. He was tall and composed, dressed in an immaculate gray suit, his shoes polished, his dark hair neatly combed. Every detail about him was precise, controlled. There was no hesitation in his posture, no nerves in his expression. This was a man who had never lost. And now, he was here for Annie. Rachel Monroe stiffened beside Tim, her gun still in her grip, though they both knew it was useless. The black SUVs behind the man in gray were lined up like an impenetrable wall, and inside them, more of the silent figures waited. The man in gray stepped forward, his hands casually at his sides. "Give me the child." Tim adjusted his hold on Annie, keeping her tucked against his chest. "Over my dead body." The man sighed, as if Tim was an inconvenience, not a threat. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Officer Watson." Tim's jaw tightened. "Then why don't you enlighten me?" The man in gray tilted his head slightly, as if considering it. His eyes flicked toward Annie, and for the first time a trace of something unreadable crossed his face. Not anger, not amusement, something close to pity. "She doesn't belong with you," he said. Rachel took a step forward, her voice cold as steel. "Who are you?" The man turned his gaze on her, as if truly seeing her for the first time. "Special Agent Monroe, you've been quite persistent." Rachel didn't react, but Tim could feel the tension radiating off her. "That didn't answer my question." The man's lips curved slightly. "My name is irrelevant, but if it makes you more comfortable, you may call me Mr. Solomon." Tim's fingers curled into Annie's hoodie. "And what exactly are you?" Solomon's gaze flicked back to him. "I am a man who keeps order." The words settled like lead in the air. Tim clenched his teeth. "What's inside her?" Solomon exhaled slowly, as if weighing how much to tell them. "Something that was never meant to leave our hands." Rachel's grip on her gun tightened. "And what happens when you get it back?" Solomon's smile faded. Tim saw the answer before he spoke. "You kill her." Solomon didn't deny it. Tim's pulse roared in his ears. His hands clenched tighter around Annie, who let out a small whimper, her fingers tangled in his jacket. Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper. "You monsters put something inside a child, and now you want to—" Solomon cut her off. "It's not personal." Tim's blood boiled. "It's personal to her." Solomon regarded him for a long moment. Then, in a voice colder than ice, "She was never supposed to survive this long." The word sent a violent chill through Tim's body. Annie had never been a person to these people. She had been a test, a vessel, a tool. Tim's breath came sharp and slow. His entire body burned with rage. "You're not taking her." Solomon's gaze darkened. "You don't have a choice." Then, he lifted his hand, and behind him the SUV doors opened all at once. The silent ones stepped out. Rachel inhaled sharply. "Tim, we are outnumbered." Tim knew, but he also knew one thing. He wasn't letting go of Annie. Not now, not ever. So he did the only thing he could. He turned and ran. Tim Watson had never run from a fight in his life, but this wasn't a fight. This was survival. Annie clung to him, her tiny fingers twisting in his jacket, her breath hot against his neck as he bolted across the parking lot. Rachel Monroe was right behind him, her gun drawn even though they both knew it was useless against whatever those things were. Behind them, the silent ones moved. They didn't charge, they didn't sprint, they walked, steady, relentless, unstoppable. Mr. Solomon's voice carried across the pavement, smooth as ever. "There is nowhere to run, Officer Watson." Tim didn't look back. They weren't getting Annie, not today. "Car!" Rachel barked, pointing toward an idling police cruiser at the edge of the lot. The officer inside had stepped out, his attention locked on the chaos unfolding near the hospital doors. He hadn't seen them yet. It was their only chance. Tim's legs burned as he pushed himself harder, his pulse roaring in his ears. Annie's small body was light, but his arms ached from the sheer force of holding her so tightly. 20 feet to the car. 15. 10. The officer finally turned toward them, his eyes widening. "Hey, what's going on?" Rachel didn't slow down. "Out of the car, now!" The officer hesitated. "Wait!" Rachel didn't wait. She yanked him aside just as Tim reached the door. He threw it open and shoved Annie into the back seat, then scrambled into the driver's seat. Rachel was right behind him, slamming the passenger door shut just as the first silent one reached them. Tim's hand hit the gear shift. "Hold on!" The tires screamed against the asphalt as he floored it. The cruiser lurched forward, barely missing the figures now closing in. Rachel twisted in her seat, looking out the back window. "They're still coming." Tim didn't need to check. He could feel it. "They don't stop," he growled, gripping the wheel tight. "They just keep coming." Annie whimpered in the back seat. "They always find me." Tim's heart clenched. He met her gaze in the rearview mirror. "Not this time, sweetheart." He pushed the gas pedal harder. They weren't running. They were escaping. But deep down, Tim knew this wasn't over. Not even close. The city blurred past as Tim Watson gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The police cruiser roared down the empty streets, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the buildings as he pushed the engine to its limit. Rachel Monroe sat beside him, her breath coming in sharp, measured bursts as she checked the side mirrors. "They're still following." Tim didn't have to ask. He felt them. The silent ones didn't need cars, they didn't run, they didn't rush, but somehow they were always there. Annie huddled in the back seat, her small body curled into the corner, her fingers still clutching the hem of her oversized hoodie. Her tiny chest rose and fell too quickly. She was panicking. Tim forced his voice to stay calm. "We're gonna be okay, sweetheart." Annie didn't look convinced. Rachel turned toward him. We need a plan, Tim. They're not gonna stop. He exhaled sharply, scanning the road ahead. We get somewhere they can't follow. Rachel scoffed. They walked into a hospital on lockdown. Tim, what exactly do you think they can't get into? Tim's jaw clenched. A place they don't know. Rachel hesitated. Then, realization dawned in her eyes. You have a safe house. Tim didn't confirm or deny it. He just turned the wheel sharply, taking a hard right onto a side street. The police cruiser skidded around the corner, the tires screeching against the pavement before catching traction. Rachel held onto the dashboard. Tell me it's close. 15 minutes. Rachel swore under her breath. Tim focused on the road ahead, weaving through the city, taking back streets and alleys that no standard GPS would recommend. He knew these streets better than anyone. But still, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were still there. Rachel checked the mirror again. I don't see them, but I don't like it. Tim's grip on the wheel tightened. They don't need to be seen to be close. Rachel exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. I need answers, Tim. We have a little girl with a government experiment inside her. Men in suits acting like they own the world. And now we're on the run like fugitives. What the hell is happening? Tim glanced at Annie in the rearview mirror. We'll find out when we get to the safe house. Rachel's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't like waiting. Neither did he, but right now, getting Annie to safety was the only thing that mattered. Tim turned onto a deserted stretch of road, leading toward the outskirts of the city. The buildings grew farther apart. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. They were almost there. Then Annie spoke. They're here. Tim's breath stalled. Rachel twisted in her seat. What? Annie's fingers curled into fists. They found us. Tim's stomach dropped. Then, the streetlights all went dark at once. Rachel's voice was sharp. Tim. A black SUV appeared behind them, its headlights flashing on out of nowhere. Another one pulled onto the road ahead. Tim's pulse roared. They were trapped, and the hunt was just beginning. The police cruiser tore down the dark road, the engine screaming as Tim Watson shoved the gas pedal to the floor. Gravel and dust kicked up behind them, the wheels barely clinging to the pavement. But it wasn't enough. The black SUVs, two in front, one behind, moved with a terrifying precision. No swerving, no hesitation, just closing in. Rachel Monroe's fingers hovered near her gun, her breath sharp. They're boxing us in. Tim already knew. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Annie sat curled up in the back seat, her arms wrapped around herself. She wasn't crying, she was waiting. She had been through this before. Tim clenched his jaw. Not this time. Rachel turned toward him. We need options. Tim's mind raced. He knew these roads, these back streets, these empty stretches of nowhere. He had one move left. Hold on. He yanked the wheel hard to the right. The police cruiser swerved off the road. Rachel barely had time to curse before they hit a narrow dirt trail leading into the dense forest. The tires skidded, bouncing over uneven ground, branches scraping the windows like claws. But Tim didn't slow down. The SUVs didn't hesitate either. They followed. Rachel gritted her teeth. They're not stopping. Tim's heart slammed against his ribs. I'm counting on it. The trees closed in around them, the road twisting, narrowing. The cruiser jolted over deep potholes, but Tim kept control. The forest swallowed them whole. No streetlights, no buildings, no way to track them, except for whatever was inside Annie. Rachel checked the mirror. They're still on us. Tim saw it. The SUVs moved through the trees like sharks through water, barely slowing, their engines a low, steady hum. They weren't pursuing, they were waiting. Tim exhaled sharply. We have to end this. Rachel's head snapped toward him. How? Tim didn't answer, because up ahead, he saw it. An old abandoned bridge, barely standing over a dried-up riverbed. A structure no sane person would drive over. Tim wasn't sane right now. Rachel, seatbelt. Her eyes widened. Tim, no. But he was already flooring it. The police cruiser lurched forward, tires spitting dirt as they hurtled toward the bridge. Behind them, the SUVs gave chase. 50 feet. 40. 30. Annie let out a small gasp. 20. Rachel braced herself. 10. The bridge splintered the second they hit it. The cruiser rocketed across, the wooden planks cracking beneath them. And then, with a deafening crash, the bridge collapsed behind them. Tim slammed the brakes. Dirt and debris shot into the air as the cruiser skidded to a stop. The dust settled. Silence. Rachel let out a shaky breath. Holy! Tim turned. On the other side of the now destroyed bridge, the SUVs had stopped. Blocked. The silent ones stood beside their vehicles, watching. Rachel exhaled. That bought us time. Tim's hand stayed tight on the wheel. Not enough. Because Mr. Solomon was standing at the front of the group, and he was still smiling. Annie's voice was barely a whisper. He said you can't run forever. Tim's grip tightened. Then we stop running. Tim Watson had spent his life chasing the bad guys, but for the first time he realized they weren't chasing anymore. They were waiting. He could feel Mr. Solomon's eyes on him from across the ruined bridge, that infuriating smile still on his face. The silent ones stood motionless beside him, their black suits barely touched by the wind, as if they weren't real, as if they weren't human at all. Rachel Monroe let out a slow breath, rubbing at her temples. Okay, she muttered. We bought ourselves a few minutes. Now tell me we actually have a plan. Tim didn't answer, because in the back seat, Annie had gone completely still. He turned. Sweetheart? She didn't respond. Her small hands clutched at her stomach, her fingers digging into the fabric of her hoodie. Her breathing had turned shallow, her chest barely rising. Something was happening. Rachel twisted in her seat. Annie? Annie winced. Then she let out a soft, pained whimper. Rachel's eyes widened. Oh, hell. Tim, pull over. Tim's pulse roared in his ears. He threw the cruiser into park, yanking the keys from the ignition. Rachel was already climbing into the back seat, her hands carefully reaching for Annie's small frame. Tim ripped off his seatbelt and moved fast, crouching beside them. Sweetheart, talk to us. Annie gasped. Her eyes flickered open, but something was wrong. Her pupils had dilated, too wide, too fast. Rachel yanked up Annie's hoodie, and that's when Tim saw it. The stitches across her stomach were coming undone, not like a wound tearing open, like something inside her was pushing out. Rachel's breath hitched. Oh my God, Tim's heart pounded. We have to get it out of her, now. Rachel was already reaching for the switchblade in her boot. I'm not a surgeon, Tim, but I'll be damned if I let whatever the hell is inside her stay there. Annie's body shuddered violently. Her small hands shot out, grabbing Tim's arm. Her voice, soft, shaking, was barely above a whisper. They're calling it back. Tim's blood ran cold. Rachel froze. What? Annie let out a broken breath. They're taking it back. And then, the thing inside her moved. Tim saw it. A shifting, unnatural bulge pressing against her skin. Alive. Rachel swore. Tim, hold her down. Tim's hands clamped onto Annie's small shoulders as Rachel flicked open her knife. Annie whimpered. I don't want to go back. Tim's vision blurred with rage. You're not going anywhere, sweetheart. Not while I'm breathing. Rachel gritted her teeth. Hold her still. She pressed the blade against Annie's skin, and then, the sky above them exploded. A low, mechanical hum filled the air, shaking the ground beneath them. Tim's head snapped up. Rachel's face went pale. Annie's small body arched as if something inside her had just been activated. And from the other side of the bridge, Mr. Solomon laughed. The device inside Annie had answered its call, and now they were coming to take her back. Tim Watson had fought against impossible odds before, but never like this. The hum in the air was deafening, a deep mechanical vibration that rattled through his bones. The ground trembled beneath him, the sky above twisting with unnatural clouds. Rachel Monroe crouched beside Annie in the back seat, her knife poised over the inflamed stitches, her face pale with determination. Tim, we don't have time. If we don't get this thing out of her now, we might never get the chance. Annie's small body arched violently, her back lifting off the seat as if an unseen force was pulling her away. Across the ruined bridge, Mr. Solomon stood tall, watching them with that same unreadable smile. His silent figures remained motionless beside him, waiting, because they already knew. Tim turned his eyes to the sky and froze. Shapes were descending through the swirling storm clouds. Dark, metallic objects. Not helicopters, not drones. Something else. Something not of this world. Rachel's hands trembled. Tim, tell me that's not what I think it is. Tim couldn't, because he didn't know what the hell it was. Annie let out a weak, gasping breath. I don't want to go back. Tim felt his chest tighten with rage. They're not taking you, sweetheart, he promised. I swear. Rachel exhaled sharply, then tightened her grip on the knife. Then we end this. Tim held Annie down. Do it. Rachel didn't hesitate. She pressed the blade into the first stitch. Annie screamed. Her small body convulsed, her hands clawing at Tim's jacket. The thing inside her moved. Rachel cursed, working quickly, slicing through the rough stitches. Her hands slick with blood as she pulled at the thread. It's in deep, Tim. I need more time. But they didn't have time. A blast of wind tore through the trees, bending them at unnatural angles. The ground shook harder, cracks spidering through the dirt like something beneath them was waking up. Tim shot a look toward the bridge. Mr. Solomon lifted a hand, and the silent figures began to cross. Tim grabbed his gun. Rachel, hurry the hell up! Rachel was breathing hard, her fingers buried inside Annie's wound, trying to extract whatever was inside. I feel it. It's metal. It's... Her words died. Her eyes went wide. Tim's stomach twisted. Rachel? She slowly lifted something small, metallic and pulsating in the dim light. It was a disc. No, a sphere. Dark, smooth metal, no bigger than a golf ball, its surface covered in tiny glowing lines. It hummed with an energy that didn't belong in this world. Tim barely had time to process it before Annie screamed. Her body slammed backward against the seat, her pupils blown wide, her tiny frame shaking violently. Rachel dropped the sphere. The moment it hit the car floor, everything went silent. The wind died. The ground stopped shaking. The storm above froze mid-motion, as if someone had pressed pause on the world itself. Tim barely dared to breathe. Then, the sphere floated off the floor. Tim yanked Annie into his arms, his heart hammering. Rachel. Rachel's voice was hoarse. Tim, run! The sphere detonated. A pulse of pure energy shot outward, ripping through the trees, the road, the wreckage of the bridge. Everything. Tim felt his body lift off the ground, his arms tightening around Annie as the force threw them backward. He hit the ground hard, pain exploding through his ribs. His ears rang. His vision swam. Somewhere nearby, Rachel was coughing, struggling to move. Tim forced himself up. His muscles screamed in protest, but he didn't care. He had to find Annie. She was lying on the ground, her small body limp. Tim's breath caught. Sweetheart? A weak whimper. Relief flooded his veins. Then, a shadow fell over them. Tim looked up. Mr. Solomon stood over him, untouched by the blast, his suit still immaculate. Behind him, the silent ones had stopped moving, as if disconnected. Solomon looked down at Annie. Then slowly his eyes met Tim's, and for the first time, the man looked furious. You have no idea what you've just done. Tim gritted his teeth. Then why don't you tell me? Solomon inhaled deeply. Then in a voice like a storm on the horizon, you just started a war. The words sent a chill down Tim's spine. But he didn't care, because Annie was safe in his arms. And as long as he was breathing, no one was ever taking her again.